Hello, my friend. I'm Paul. Welcome to Night of Tales, a quiet refuge for imagination and dreams. Set aside your worries, as tonight we journey together through worlds of magic, mystery, and wonder. Lie back, relax, and let the tales carry you away. Tonight we venture into the monster-haunted world of The Witcher. The wind howled off the gray expanse of the great sea. It carried the scent of salt and rotting kelp. It rattled the shutters of the tavern known as the Amber Flagon. Inside, the air was thick with the smoke of tallow candles and the smell of unwashed wool. The patrons sat hunched over their tankards. They were men of the coast. Their hands were calloused from hauling nets, and their faces were weathered by the biting spray of Sidaris. In the corner sat a man with hair as white as milk. Geralt of Rivia watched the room with eyes like molten gold. He did not blend in. He never did. Beside him sat a man in a plum bonnet with a heron feather. Dandelion strummed his lute. The poet tried to find a melody that would not offend the sullen crowd. The bard plucked a string. It rang out hollow in the damp air. "We are not welcome here," the poet whispered. Geralt took a slow sip of his ale. It was watered down and tasted of iron. He placed the tankard on the scarred wood of the table. "We have no coin for better lodgings," the Witcher replied. Dandelion sighed. He looked at the bottom of his empty cup. He adjusted his doublet, which was frayed at the cuffs. "I could sing of the Maiden of Vengerberg, or perhaps the lion cub of Sintra. These lots appreciate nothing but bawdy verses about fishwives." Geralt ignored him. His medallion hummed faintly against his chest. It was a subtle vibration. It signaled magic, or perhaps just the proximity of monsters. Here in Oakhaven, the line between the two was thin. The door to the tavern opened. The wind rushed in. It extinguished the candles near the threshold. A man stepped through. He was not a fisherman. He wore a coat of fine blue velvet trimmed with seal fur. Gold rings glittered on his fingers. The tavern fell silent. The locals lowered their eyes. This was a man who owned the boats and the nets. This was a man who owned their debts. Valerius Malner scanned the room. His eyes landed on the two strangers in the corner. He walked toward them. His boots were polished leather. They clicked rhythmically on the dirty floorboards. He stopped at their table. He did not ask for permission to sit. He pulled out a stool and smoothed his coat. "You are the Witcher," Malner stated. Geralt nodded slowly. "I am Valerius Malner, master of the Pearl Guild of Oakhaven. I have a problem that requires your particular set of skills." Dandelion perked up. He smelled gold. He leaned forward and offered a charming smile. "A pleasure to meet a man of culture in this dreary outpost. We are always at the service of the commerce of Sidaris. Molnar ignored the bard. He kept his gaze fixed on the Witcher. My divers are dying. We dredge the oyster beds 3 miles off the coast. It is lucrative work, but lately the sea has claimed my best men. They say it is the wrath of the gods. I say it is a beast. Geralt looked at the merchant. He saw the greed in the man's eyes. He also saw fear. Describe the attacks, the Witcher requested. Molnar drummed his fingers on the table. It happens at the edge of the deep shelf. The diving bells are crushed. The chains are snapped. Survivors speak of shapes in the water. Green scales. Wicked claws. They call them sea devils. I call them bad for business. Geralt knew the name. The common folk had many names for the creatures of the deep. Sea devils usually meant Vadianoi. They were an ancient race. They were intelligent and territorial. They were not mindless beasts. I will need to see the bodies, or the wreckage, Geralt said. Molnar nodded. He reached into his coat and produced a heavy leather pouch. He dropped it on the table. The sound of gold clinking against wood was heavy and pleasing. This is the advance. Double this amount when you bring me the head of the monster. I do not care what it is. I want the waters clear. I want my divers back at work. Geralt took the pouch. He weighed it in his hand. It was enough to keep them fed for months. It was enough to buy new strings for the lute and oats for Roach. I will investigate, but I promise no head until I know what I'm hunting. Molnar stood up. He adjusted his seal for collar. Just kill it, Witcher. That is what you are for. The merchant turned and walked away. The silence of the tavern held until he was gone. Then the murmurs returned. The fishermen looked at Geralt with a mixture of pity and resentment. They knew the sea. They knew that some things in the water were best left alone. Dandelion reached for the pouch. Geralt slapped his hand away gently. We have work to do, the Witcher said. Outside, the wind picked up. The waves crashed against the pier. The sound was like a heartbeat, a slow and rhythmic warning from the deep. Geralt looked up the window. The darkness of the ocean was absolute. Somewhere out there beneath the cold waves, something was waiting. The Witcher felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. It was the weight of necessity. He drank the last of the sour ale. He stood up. The silver sword on his back caught the light of the dying fire. Come, Geralt commanded. The bard grabbed his lute. They stepped out into the night. The air was cold and wet. The village of Oakhaven huddled against the storm. It was a place of hard living and desperate people. And now it was a place of blood. Geralt walked toward the docks. The hunt had begun. The morning sun brought no warmth to the coast of Sideris. A pale gray light filtered through the mist. It clung to the shoreline like a shroud. Daryl walked along the rocky beach. The tide was low. It revealed tangles of black kelp and the bleached bones of driftwood. The air smelled of iodine and decay. Behind him, Dandelion picked his way carefully over the wet stones. The bard was complaining about the dampness ruining his boots. He stopped to examine a shell. He tossed it back into the surf. "This place is cursed," the bard muttered. Geralt ignored him. He crouched near the waterline. He was examining the remains of a small skiff. The wood was splintered. It had not been smashed by rocks. It had been torn apart. The Witcher ran a gloved hand over the hull. He found deep gouges in the timber. They were parallel grooves. These were made by tools, not teeth, Geralt observed. He looked closer. Embedded in the wood was a fragment of jagged obsidian. It was a weapon tip. The Vadianoi forged weapons from volcanic glass and coral. This confirmed his suspicion. This was not a monster hunt. This was a war. He stood up and looked out at the horizon. The sea was calm now. It hid its secrets well. Dandelion approached him. He held a piece of driftwood. "I spoke to the girl at the lighthouse. She has eyes like the sea itself. She told me stories." Geralt turned to his companion. "What kind of stories?" "She says the locals used to leave offerings on the Black Reef. Garlands of flowers, loaves of bread. They called it the tide to the Green Kings. She says Molnar stopped the practice when he bought the rights to the coast." "The Green Kings," Geralt repeated. It was a local name for the Vadianoi. In the elder days, humans and the fish people had truces. They traded. They respected boundaries. Molnar had likely broken those boundaries. "We need to speak to a survivor," the Witcher decided. They found the man in a shack near the curing sheds. His name was Tomas. He sat on a crate staring at his hands. His skin was pale and his eyes were hollow. He shook when Geralt entered. "I have nothing to say," the diver whispered. Geralt sat on a barrel opposite him. He kept his voice low and even. He used the slow rhythm of the Axii sign. It was a simple charm to soothe the mind. "Tell me where you were dredging," Geralt commanded gently. Tomas blinked. His shoulders slumped. "We went to the shelf. The boss said the pearls were bigger there. It is the forbidden water. The old folks say it belongs to them. The Vadianoi." Tomas nodded. "We dropped the nets. We felt them hit the bottom. Then the water boiled. The chain screamed. My brother was in the bell. They cut the line. I saw them. They were not beasts. They looked like knights in armor of scales. They were protecting something. Protecting what? Geralt asked. The reef. The coral towers. We were smashing them with the dredge. Geralt stood up. The picture was clear. The Pearl Guild was destroying a Vadianoi settlement. The attacks were defensive. The creatures were protecting their home. Molnar had lied. Or perhaps he simply did not care. We are leaving, Geralt said to Dandelion. They walked back into the salty air. The town of Oakhaven bustled with grim activity. Men repaired nets. Women gutted fish. They were unaware that they were on the brink of slaughter. If the Vadianoi decided to retaliate in force, the town would burn. We must go to the reef, Geralt stated. Dandelion looked pale. In a boat, out there, with the fishmen. I need to see what they are guarding. I need to broker a truce before Molnar gets everyone killed. They returned to the docks. Molnar was there overseeing the loading of a heavy barge. He had a crew of armed mercenaries. They looked like hard men. They carried crossbows and pikes. You are coming with us, Witcher, Molnar shouted over the noise of the workers. I work alone, Geralt replied. Not today. My foreman Caleb will captain the boat. He will ensure you do not get cold feet. We are going to the Black Reef. We are going to finish this. Geralt looked at Caleb. The foreman was a giant of a man with a shaved head and a cruel mouth. He sharpened a harpoon with a whetstone. The sound was grating. Geralt had no choice. If he stayed behind, the mercenaries would provoke a massacre. He had to be the buffer. He stepped onto the barge. The wood groaned under his weight. Dandelion moved to follow. Geralt stopped him with a hand on his chest. Stay here. Watch the horses. If I do not come back by dawn, ride for Novigrad. The bard looked at him. For once he had no witty retort. He simply nodded. Good luck, Geralt, the poet said quietly. The barge pushed off. The oars cut into the dark water. They moved away from the safety of the shore. The mist swallowed them. Geralt sat in the bow. He checked his potions. He had a vial of golden oriole and a flask of killer whale. He would need to breathe water. He would need to see in the dark. The sea grew rougher as they approached the deep shelf. The water changed color from gray to a deep bruising purple. The Black Reef lay below. It was a city of coral and stone hidden from the eyes of men. Caleb spat into the water. Get ready, freak. We are here. Geralt ignored the insult. He uncorked the potion. The liquid smelled of sulfur and mint. He drank it in one swallow. The world sharpened. His pupils dilated until his eyes were entirely black. His heart rate slowed. The sounds of the surface faded. He could hear the pulse of the ocean. He stood on the edge of the boat. He drew his steel sword. Silver was for monsters. Steel was for enemies who used weapons. The Vadianoi were warriors. He would treat them with that respect. "Wait for my signal," Gerald told the foreman. He did not wait for a reply. He stepped off the edge. The cold water rushed up to meet him. It closed over his head like a heavy curtain. He sank into the silence. The transition was instant. The noise of the wind and the creaking wood vanished. It was replaced by the muffled thrum of the deep. The potion took hold. Gerald's lungs stopped burning for air. His blood moved slowly like thick oil. The water around him was clear and cold. He sank toward the bottom. The black reef rose up to meet him. It was magnificent. Towers of spiraling coral reached for the surface. Arches of stone bridged the gaps between the formations. It was not a natural formation. It was architecture. The Vadianoi had built this over centuries. Gerald drifted closer. He saw the damage. Great swathes of the reef had been smashed. The dredging nets of the guild had torn through the delicate structures. Broken coral lay scattered like bones. Movement caught his eye. Shadows detached themselves from the darkness. 3 figures approached him. They moved with fluid grace. They were tall and humanoid. Their skin was a mottled green and gray. Gills flared on their necks. They wore armor fashioned from crab chitin and hardened leather. They held tridents of obsidian. Gerald sheathed his sword. He held his empty hands out. He formed the sign of art but did not cast it. It was a gesture of power held in check. He then signed a greeting in the rough handspeak of the elder races. "Peace," he signed. The leader of the Vadianoi swam forward. He was larger than the others. A crest of spines ran down his back. His eyes were large and unblinking. He pointed his trident at the destruction. "You break." The creature's gesture was clear. Gerald shook his head. He pointed up to the surface. He pointed to himself and then to the reef. "I stopped them." He signed. The Vadianoi lowered his weapon slightly. He gestured for Geralt to follow. They swam deeper into the reef. In the center of the formation was a sheltered grotto. There, nestled in the soft sand, were hundreds of translucent spheres. Eggs. They pulsed with a faint inner light. The next generation of the tribe. The dredging nets had missed them by mere yards. If the guild dropped their heavy weights here, the entire clutch would be destroyed. Gerald understood. This was not about territory. It was about survival. He turned to the leader. He nodded. He signaled that he would protect the eggs. The Vadianoi watched him. There was intelligence in those alien eyes. There was a tentative trust. Suddenly the water convulsed. A shockwave hammered against Geralt's chest. A dull boom echoed through the reef. Debris rained down. Above them the dark shape of the barge loomed. A metal cylinder sank through the water. It was a depth charge, a primitive explosive used for mining. Caleb, the fool, was bombing the reef. He, the Vadianoi, shrieked. It was a sound felt rather than heard. They turned on Geralt. Their trust evaporated. They bared needle-like teeth. They believed he was a distraction. Geralt drew his sword. The water offered resistance, but his Witcher mutations compensated. He parried a thrust from a trident. He did not counterattack. He cast the sign of Quen. A golden shield shimmered around him. It deflected another blow. He had to stop the bombing. He kicked his legs and shot toward the surface. The Vadianoi pursued him. They were fast. They were in their element. Another explosion rocked the water. Geralt felt the concussion rattle his teeth. He saw the second charge sinking. He reached out with his free hand. He cast hard. The telekinetic blast struck the sinking canister. It pushed it away from the reef. It detonated in open water. The shockwave tossed Geralt like a rag doll. He broke the surface, gasping. The air tasted harsh after the potion. He grabbed the rail of the barge. Stop! Geralt roared. Caleb looked down at him. The foreman held another lit fuse. Die, fish lovers. Caleb laughed. He threw the explosive. Geralt did not think. He vaulted over the rail. He caught the canister in midair. The fuse hissed. He spun and hurled it back into the sea far away from the reef and the boat. It exploded on impact with the water. A geyser of spray erupted. The barge rocked violently. Caleb stumbled. Witcher, are you mad? The foreman shouted. They are protecting eggs. Geralt shouted back. You are killing their young. Caleb sneered. They are monsters. I don't care about their spawn. Molnar pays for a clear sea. The water around the boat began to churn. Hundreds of heads broke the surface. The Vadianoi had risen. They held spears and nets. Their eyes glowed with fury. They swarmed up the sides of the barge. The mercenaries fired their crossbows. Bolts struck scales and glanced off. The Vadianoi dragged men into the water. The screams were cut short as the dark ocean swallowed them. Geralt drew his silver sword now. He moved in a blur. He cut the shaft of a trident aimed at Caleb. He kicked a Vadianoi warrior back into the sea. back to the shore," Tyrrell commanded. Caleb was pale. He saw the horde. He scrambled to the tiller. "Row!" the foreman screamed at the survivors. The barge turned clumsily. Tyrrell stood at the stern. He was a whirlwind of steel. He did not kill to slaughter. He killed to defend. He struck to disable. He used hard to blast the creatures off the deck. The Vadianoi did not pursue the boat far. They held the line at the reef. They screamed their rage at the retreating humans. It was a sound of mourning and war. Tyrrell wiped the salt water from his eyes. The potion was wearing off. The pain of the toxins began to set in. He looked at Caleb. The man was shaking. "You have started a war," Tyrrell said coldly. Caleb looked at the Witcher with hatred. "You helped them. I saw you. You signaled them. I tried to save you," Tyrrell replied. The barge limped back toward Oakhaven. The smoke from the explosives drifted over the water. The sea was no longer just a place of business. It was an enemy, and it was coming to land. The barge struck the pier of Oakhaven with a splintering crash. The surviving mercenaries scrambled onto the wood. They were soaked and terrified. They shouted stories of the sea boiling with monsters. They claimed the Witcher had summoned the devils. Geralt stepped onto the dock. His movement was stiff. The after effects of the potions made his nerves raw. He sheathed his swords. A crowd gathered instantly. Panic spreads faster than fire in a wooden town. Molnar pushed through the throng. His velvet coat was immaculate. It was a stark contrast to the blood and brine on the survivors. He looked at Caleb. "Report," Molnar demanded. Caleb pointed a shaking finger at Geralt. "He betrayed us. He parleyed with the beasts. He threw my charges away. The sea devils are coming. They are coming for all of us." The crowd murmured. The sound grew into a roar of anger. Eyes turned to the Witcher. Hands reached for knives and stones. Geralt stood his ground. He did not reach for his weapons. To draw a sword on a crowd was to invite a massacre. Molnar turned to Geralt. His face was twisted with calculation. He saw a scapegoat. "Is this true? Did you side with the monsters against your own kind?" "I sided with the terms of the contract." Geralt's voice was gravel. "You hired me to solve the problem. The problem is you." The merchant laughed. It was a cold sound. "I am Oakhaven. I provide the bread. I provide the coin. You are a mutant drifter." Molnar turned to the crowd. He raised his arms. "This non-human has doomed us. The Vadianoi will attack tonight. We must defend our homes." We must kill them all. And perhaps we should start with their spy. The mob surged forward. A stone struck Geralt's shoulder. He did not flinch. Stop! The voice was not Geralt's. It was Dandelion. The bard stood on a stack of crates. He held his lute like a weapon. Listen to me, you fools. The Witcher saved your sons. I saw the barge return. Without him, you would be food for the crabs. Then a fisherman shouted, "He talks to fish. He is one of them." Geralt stepped forward. The crowd recoiled slightly. The fear of the Witcher was still stronger than their anger. They are not attacking because they hate you, Geralt said loudly. They are attacking because you are smashing their eggs. The reef is their nursery. Molnar sneered. Who cares about fish eggs? The pearls are there. They have a treaty. Geralt continued. The old treaty. The Forbidden Reef. You know this. He looked at the older fishermen in the crowd, the ones with gray beards and memories of the old ways. They looked down. They knew. Molnar realized he was losing the narrative. Seize him. Molnar ordered the guards. The guards hesitated. They looked at the Witcher's eyes. They looked at the two swords. Suddenly a horn blew from the watchtower. It was a low, mournful note. They are here. The watchman screamed. The crowd turned to the sea. The water was receding. A massive tide was pulling back. It revealed the wet sand, and on the sand they marched. Hundreds of Vadianoi warriors. They emerged from the surf in disciplined lines. Their armor glistened. Their obsidian spears caught the pale light. They did not charge. They waited. The town panicked. People screamed and ran. Molnar stood frozen. His greed had not prepared him for an army. Geralt grabbed Molnar by the collar. He dragged the merchant toward the edge of the dock. You have one chance, Geralt hissed. Molnar stammered. Kill them. Use your magic. There are too many, said Geralt. They want justice. They want the destruction to stop. Geralt looked at the Vadianoi leader standing in the surf. It was the same warrior from the reef. The creature raised a hand. It held a broken piece of the dredging net. Geralt pulled a torch from a sconce on the pier. He thrust it into Molnar's hand. Burn the deed, Geralt commanded. What? Molnar shrieked. The deed to the reef rights. The document that says you own the shelf. Burn it. Show them you renounce the claim. It is worth thousands. It is worth your life. Geralt tightened his grip. The Vadianoi took a step forward. The sound of their wet feet slapping the wet sand was terrifying. The town guards dropped their pikes. They would not fight this tide. Molnar looked at the army. He looked at the Witcher. He looked at the torch. He was a businessman. He knew when a deal was bad. He reached into his coat. He pulled out a parchment stamped with the wax seal of the King of Sidaris. His hand shook. He held it to the flame. The paper curled. It blackened. The fire consumed the seal. Molnar dropped the burning parchment onto the stones of the pier. Geralt released him. He walked to the edge of the dock. He used the sign of art to push the burning ashes toward the sea. The wind caught them. They drifted over the water. The Vadianoi leader watched. He lowered his spear. He understood the gesture. The claim was gone. The aggression was ended. The creatures waited for a long moment. Then slowly they turned. They walked back into the surf. The water rose to meet them. They vanished beneath the waves, leaving only the foam and the silence. The night settled over Oakhaven. The storm had passed. The sky was clear and filled with the cold light of the stars. The town was quiet. It was the silence of relief and exhaustion. The mob had dispersed. The fishermen had returned to their homes to bar their doors. Geralt sat on a bench outside the amber flagon. He cleaned his sword with an oiled rag. The rhythmic motion was soothing. The blade shone in the starlight. Dandelion emerged from the tavern. He carried 2 mugs of ale. He sat beside the Witcher. That was quite a performance, said the bard, although I think Molnar is less than pleased. Geralt sheathed the sword. He took the mug. He is alive. That is more than he deserves. Molnar had retreated to his manor on the hill. The Pearl Guild was effectively bankrupt without the deep shelf. The town would survive. They would go back to fishing the shallows. The economy would shrink, but the blood would stop flowing. A servant boy approached them. He looked nervous. He held a small pouch. Master Molnar sends this. The boy squeaked. He dropped the pouch on the bench and ran away. Dandelion picked it up. He opened it and counted. 50 crowns. The bard scoffed. That is 1/10 of what he promised. He claims breach of contract, said Geralt. He claims I failed to kill the beast. Dandelion shook his head. You saved his town. You saved his neck. And he pays you in copper. It is the way of things. Geralt stood up. He fastened the pouch to his belt. The Witcher felt the familiar ache in his joints. The damp air of Sidaris was seeping into his bones. He was tired. He wanted a dry bed, but he knew they could not stay here. The town did not view him as a hero. They viewed him as a reminder of their fear. They viewed him as the man who brought the sea monsters to their door. We should leave, Geralt said. Now? Dandelion asked. In the dark? The road is better than the welcome here. They walked to the stables. Roach was waiting. The mare nickered softly when she saw Geralt. He stroked her nose. He checked the saddle girth. Dandelion mounted his own horse, a gelding that had seen better days. The bard adjusted his lute on his back. So, Dandelion mused as they trotted out of the village. The Green Kings keep their reef. The merchant loses his gold. And we ride away with barely enough to buy dinner. Geralt looked back at the sea one last time. The lighthouse beam swept across the dark water. For a moment it illuminated the waves. The ocean looked peaceful. It hid its teeth well. It is the lesser evil, Geralt said. Is it? Dandelion asked. Or is it just another mess? Geralt did not answer. He turned Roach toward the inland road. The sound of hooves on the dirt was steady. Plop, plop, plop. It was a rhythm that signaled the end of one story and the beginning of the journey to the next. They rode through the coastal pine forests. The smell of resin replaced the smell of brine. The trees whispered in the wind. The world was vast and full of monsters. But for tonight the sword stayed in the scabbard. The Witcher closed his eyes for a second as he rode, letting his other senses take over. The rustle of a badger in the brush, the hoot of an owl, the breathing of the horses. Sleep would come later, for now there was the road, and the road was enough.